The countdown? Hi. Well, I was talking to Tony. After all, he's part of the show. Hello, everyone. This is Tatiana Dudyez. We are hosting Thrive and Shine today, and we are excited once more to create possibilities live with all of you. This show, as some of you know already, is about authentic power and consciousness. How to live with a conscious embodiment in everyday life. My goal is really to enhance the collective consciousness, to rise to bring different possibilities to women in the workforce, to women in general, obviously, particularly to women in business, to really offer them this new possibility for self-leadership and a new relationship with power. And what does that mean? And how can they embody that on a daily basis? So that leads me to the perfect segue to introduce you this beautiful friend of mine and beautiful professional whose name is Claudia Black. Claudia, welcome.
Oh my gosh, applause. Thank you.
Applause, of course. Claudia is a professional performer. She is also a thinking partner, trauma and creativity transformation coach. A lot of big words. To summarize, also a big woman and a big personality and a beautiful soul who I've met when I first came to LA as a friend and who welcomed me so graciously.
Bien sûr.
And and we've had the great pleasure of deepening our bond with meaningful conversations and with subjects that are very, very dear to our hearts. Part of those subjects are profound and affect change that we want to see in this world, and that's why I thought you would be, of course, my perfect guest, because not only I believe I've seen you live, and I've seen you expand into, well, for the little bit that I've seen you expand since the past year and a half. But I mean, what I love about you is that you really take you make a conscious daily decision to live with your principles and your values and your beliefs. I mean, every time we speak, you have such presence through all of those beliefs. So it's not just talk and rhetoric, it is conscious embodiment. And that's what I'm so interested in, because that's how we can change the world. It's not enough to talk. I'm in love with words, and I know you are as well, because I love your vocabulary. But that's what we aim to that's how we aim to create change, right? So tell me more about, let's start with this. Tell me more about how this conscious work aligns with who you are and what you do, or how you've started your professional life, because I think it's right, it's expanding, it's an evolution, it's morphing as everyone's lives morphs, but I find your path has been quite interesting. So tell us more.
Thank you for having me. These sort of subjects are just sort of the food of life.
Right?
I know. Terrible at small talk. So if I go to a party, I'll probably end up speaking to a member of the staff who just seems really interesting to me.
Yes, for like an hour and a half, and then the party is over, right?
Exactly. But then you don't want them to get fired. So you're like, this is amazing, but I really want you to keep your job. Thank you so much for making this evening interesting for me.
Gotta go.
Yeah, exactly. And thanks for the extra food. Like, I'll stop them as the tray is coming out and just, I don't know. So it's really interesting. There are these sort of cinematic moments in my life when I look back where, in terms of finding identity and what that meant to me at the time and what identity now means to me, what I identified with, I mean, my parents were like, what are we going to do with Claude? She just doesn't seem, I had a natural ability in music. I could pick up an instrument and play it, especially wind instruments. I was sort of very much sort of following in the footsteps and shadow of my sister. So that was a whole growth experience as well, just learning to try the things that were already being, you know, so successfully achieved by my sister, because I knew if I didn't, part of me would die. You know, it was like, I have to take this risk and come out of the shadow and try these things on. I had very supportive teachers who really changed my life a lot because of the way they mentored and supported and the way they saw me. So that's a thread that I've carried through, and why coaching and educating is important to me now, to pay that forward. To be seen in that way when the family dynamic may not allow for you to be seen the way that your soul would choose to be seen, and the obstacles you then sort of overcome in order to find yourself again. So I remember I was interested in journalism and the truth, and I was interested in acting, but people saw me as a singer, and I just kind of shifted the music to the side. And as soon as I stepped into acting, it all happened with ridiculous ease. Like the universe just
kept bringing it to you. Yes.
And I think it was trauma that stopped me from singing, because I couldn't handle the responsibility of being not only the instrument, not being embodied. I wasn't in my body. I was dissociated a lot of the time. And I didn't know this then. And then the anxiety of knowing that there was an actual result that needed to be achieved. When you sing, you have to hit the note.
Correct,
when you're acting, people may not feel it, or they may think you're a bit off. But the singing, to me, there was just way too much pressure. And I self-destructed, and I would get colds, and I'd get all this psychosomatic stuff that would manifest in my body, and I just couldn't handle it. And then one day I was seeing... I saw Terminator 2, and I saw Sigourney Weaver in Alien, and I went,
I can do that.
I can do that.
I can be an alien. No, sorry.
Well, that too, yes, because I very much identify with being from somewhere else. Also the black sheep.
That's called just not having to fit in. That's all.
I know. And I've got something beautiful about that.
And that's
I wanted to
okay.
share
We
with
do
you.
not have to fit in.
It's diabolical to fit in.
Absolutely.
And yet, with everything I'm learning, I'm a somatic experiencing, or training to be a somatic experiencing practitioner, which is an extraordinary, life-changing set of tools for me that I share with others now. Really helped me connect, and the mind-body connection, because talk therapy for me, I was pretty self-aware, even though I had blind spots and still do. I now realize I have deaf spots, which is fascinating. There are things that I just have not been hearing.
Oh, for sure.
Ooh,
we all
really
do.
Strong lately,
right?
And so, it's so humbling.
You mean you just don't want to hear it, and it goes like...
Yeah, but it all comes down for me to self-worth, and what were those structures, or what were those crappy stories that somehow I was telling myself I didn't deserve this, or I didn't deserve to be treated this way, so I'm going to stay in the crappy story of these are the things that happened to Claudia because her life is stressful and she'll get through them, but she doesn't get to thrive. She just has to kind of make it through adversity.
Well, you're thriving now, baby.
Yeah, baby.
Right?
Yeah. Thank the goddesses.
And the gods.
And the gods as well.
As
but
the
the gods get thanked a lot. The goddesses maybe not so much.
Ah, okay.
I don't know. But I really am having to embrace my feminine, which you and I have talked about before. And I mean, I love talking about discernible pieces. So if I may share.
Of course, you may share anything.
So this is apropos. It's appropriate because of Valentine's Day.
Oh.
I do something that's sort of galantines. I'll be with some
Galantines.
Yes, any girls, any gals who were available and doing the deep dives on themselves. And I was tired and really wanted to reschedule. And I'm really glad I didn't, because I ended up having a really profound experience. I work with some shamanic mentors, and in terms of shamanism at its root, it's sort of someone who's able to go to another realm or dimension and bring back something that may be of use to the consciousness. Doesn't require medicine. You are the medicine. The story is the medicine, and yet there are plant medicines that I have worked with. And we were talking, and we sort of had this ritual, and I was able, as a result of being triggered by a date that went a little askew.
Anyone has actually experienced
Oh
that?
my
Really?
God,
A
it was
date that goes a little askew?
And you know what I didn't do?
Oh, what I didn't introduce
What?
you as is a single mother,
No.
right?
Yay!
Claudia is a single, beautiful girl.
Yeah, well, the thing
Happens.
one of the things I feared most was being a single mother.
Really?
Et voila.
Ah, okay. That's why you weren't wanting to introduce yourself as, if that was a scary
Well, maybe there's still a vestigial sort of thread of that, but also we've got to be really conscious of what we're creating and understanding that thought, and creativity is at the level of thought. Having to grow new muscles and become mentally strong, that's been a huge aspect of my healing. Well, I looked at an article that was online about the 13 things that mentally strong people do. Wasn't doing any of them. I was like, wow, that's really important information.
Yeah. You have to, we can find just about anything online, right?
Yeah.
No offense to anyone. Yeah. I'm creating content online. We all, in this world of coaching, we create content online. Yeah. And, there is pretty much anything to be found online. So it doesn't mean, that it's credible,
That's
true stuff. It just means you have to look at where this research or this article is coming from.
I agree.
Right?
Completely.
So
and
what...
Yet still, I'm not even going to cite the article because, as you say, I didn't even look into who it was. But it was enough for me to think, okay, I'm probably doing myself a disservice.
To what?
Allowing the thoughts in, thoughts that were negative and the way the thoughts were coming in. So I just, in some of the healing modalities that I've worked in, we actually don't focus on mind at all. And I think it's great. In LA, there's a lot of heart-centered practices, which I think begin the process of embodiment, because once you've accessed your heart, then you can really be in your body. Or maybe athletes are very in their bodies and then they can access their hearts.
Yeah, the funny part of all of this is really having to learn to have access to the heart when really we were born to be in our heart and to be in our light. We've disconnected in life through experiences but it's so interesting that it's such a big deal for all of us today to what do I do to come back to my heart and live there and live in love. It's not about living in love, particularly romantic love. It's living through through your heart. What does that mean?
And self-love. And I think,
of course, that goes without saying.
And yet, is, I think, elusive. I think that we're taught and trained in our culture to, I think fundamentally at the bottom of most of the things that inhibit us are guilt and shame. Yeah. And they really are, I think, the product of a lack of boundaries. So we get angry when someone crosses a boundary in us, or we get angry with ourselves when we allow a boundary to be crossed, and that's where we get our guilt and shame. And then that starts to create stories around what we really feel we deserve, what we're worthy of. And I think, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just wanting to come back to also this story about
the date
that went askew. I don't want to cut you off in any way, but I really want to hear the story because it feels juicy.
It is,
and we want juicy on this show. We want fun.
Speaking of, I'd like to actually give you a little gift because the date started with this gift.
Oh, thank you, the Go Giver. A little story about a powerful business idea. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was appropriate for a female.
I'm so excited.
CEO and businesswoman. It's just a really nice parable about 5 laws that you can live by in business, which are counterculture currently.
Really?
The day that I started reading it, Arianna Huffington came up on my feed, and she's written the most recent foreword, I think, for the book. And she says it's better to be a go-giver than a go-getter. So it's
absolutely. It starts by giving.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
In service, it's one of the key sort of principles.
Well, in service, yes, but it's actually in life in general.
Yeah.
It starts with giving. Yeah. We live such conditional lives. We love conditionally, and we're not even aware. And
why?
And
why?
Exactly.
Why do we love conditionally?
We're conditioned that way.
We are, and also I think it has to do with how it equates precisely to how much we actually are capable of loving ourselves. Because
of course, yes.
I think all behavior is, if we act out, it's a sign of an unmet need, whether it's a child doing it or even as adults. So what are those unmet needs? If you're parenting a child, it's your responsibility until they're older to meet a lot of those needs and then foster and nourish, autonomy in them so that they can do it for themselves.
That's correct, yes.
But then if we're acting out, we've triggered a young piece in ourselves, a young age where something similar happened, and it's an opportunity, if we can look at it, to try and understand and dig in. How did I get to this place? Why did my inner child suddenly sabotage this situation and become a terrorist? And that's a lot of the work that I do when I'm working with people is how to get into presence when you're public speaking and you feel that something inside you is really jeopardizing your ability to be in space and time.
To be in your heart.
Yeah, and exactly. To be in the body, to be in the heart. I mean, that's my real definition of presence is embodiment, which is interesting.
Yes, and it's the one word today that
it is the key word.
I summarize the show with, really, but it's perfect, and it's what we all need to bring people back to, right? It's that consciousness of what the conditioning has created, and take ownership of it, self-responsibility, and then go back into the world consistently with an intention to give. And it's actually funny you're talking about this because within the concept of self-leadership, because this is how I lead an event every month for the Elevate Group. The Elevate Group is a network of professional women created by Sally Krawcheck, and I'm part of the board here in LA, and they've asked me to lead lunches on a monthly basis called the leadership lunches. And so I asked them at the beginning, I said, well, what do you have in mind for this? And they're like, well, it's leadership, and it's women who want to connect and do what you want. And I'm like, great. All right. So
amazing.
So one of my principles that I introduce every time, because it's so dear to my heart, is that you're not here to just get something out of one of these women because you want work and you want a possibility for more in terms of perhaps a financial outcome, a sale, whatever. You're not here for that. You might have it as a result if you give and you come with your heart. You present yourself authentically, or as possibly authentically as possible, and you give of you, and you give of anything you can possibly give to this woman next to you, or to the one across you.
That's the real foundation of proper networking, isn't it? Is how can you be, how can you serve? It is,
yes, it is, and it's not for men, and it's just not to counter men in any ways, because men have a different way of getting to their outcome.
Well, you'd be delighted to hear this was written, co-authored by 2 men.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, and the beautiful part of men's strategy to get to an outcome is really is very much more linear.
Right, and active. It's about the doing rather than the being.
Exactly. And we have been unconscious beings as women to reenact men's ways. And now we have to come back to what matters to our hearts more. And we are about the process. We are about the meaning and the why. And how can we include more of you? And how can we, we're so much more nurturing and loving. And there's nothing wrong with that. We've been told by the conditioning, right? That it is not the way to get to network, which is simply a different way. There's nothing wrong with either. It's just let's be authentic and let's create ways for us that work for us.
Yeah, and I think that there's a big paradigm shift now, thank goodness, with everything that's happening in this crazy play that's unfolding in front of us in terms of America and politics. It's an opportunity, because I always believe in philosophically in the macrocosm and the microcosm, so I can see what's playing out on the world on a bigger stage, whether it's the world or the country or my village or whatever, as I would call it, my community, and then I go inward and look at those pieces in me, as you were saying before. And I think the biggest paradigm shift is seeing what is the result of power when it comes from a place of controlling as opposed to power from presence, right?
And that's the radical paradox between power over or power from within.
Yeah, I mean, it really is an inside job. And so here's, do you want me to?
So yes, of course, we digress, and we're very good at that.
but this is part of my organic intelligence, is sort of the spider web of possibility. You can say one word and one phrase, and it's going to...
And that's very feminine.
Yeah, and so I'm really having to come more into my feminine, because my masculine energy has become a little destructive. And that's one of the things we talk about in one of our shamanic lineages, is that healthy feminine is the mystery, the cool, dark mystery.
Yes.
And healthy masculine is the department of getting shit done, right?
Yep.
But when masculine gets unhealthy, it goes into destructive behavior and can blow the
that's
world
the
up,
shadow.
right? the shadow of the unhealthy masculine, and the shadow of the feminine is to engulf like a black hole, to consume and to take over and to
Yeah.
So when men feel suffocated in their relationships, they're being engulfed by an unhealthy feminine energy, right?
An unhealthy spider.
Ooh, yeah. The Black Widow.
Right?
So this is what broke my heart recently, and I've read it about 20 times because it explains why my date went askew. First of all, I didn't ground. I had a lot of stuff going on in my life that was really, a few years ago it would have rendered me speechless and floored, and I wouldn't have left my house for weeks. But nowadays I just still know that I'm going to have to do something to recenter myself and, and leave it behind me. I didn't. And so when I went into the date, because I liked him so much, online dating is an amazing experience, and I'm learning so much from it, and there's no way I'm going to do it or continue to do it unless I'm finding it a positive experience. So I've really made very big deals with myself about it, which I'd be happy to.
Is it your first time
Yeah.
dating online?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I've been very nervous about it because I've had stalkers and all sorts of stuff, so I'm
Yes.
like, have to
Yeah.
create some kind of container.
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, I'm no longer. I've tried it a few times, but maybe 2 or 3 times over my life in the last 6 years, I would say, 7 years. And I must say, I'm not really enjoying it. So I've let it go. I mean, I have a beautiful man in my life today, so I'm happy, and I don't need to do any of that. But even if I was single again, I find it very challenging.
I've been using it as a spiritual practice because
Yes.
I read a book about tantric dating, and tantra is often, the minute you say that, people think of the Kama Sutra and they think of all these crazy positions. It's not about that.
Well, it's a crazy position online.
It is, yeah.
In some way.
Well,
online dating is a tantric
Yes.
positioning, online tantric positioning.
Yeah.
Huh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Without even having to leave your sofa.
Correct.
So,
That opens up a world of
it
possibilities.
really does. Imagine that, the adults that will say to me, would you like to have a phone conversation? I'm like, ooh, I wasn't expecting that. And then I have to sort of prepare myself to be more in alignment with who I actually am, because
Right.
I've gotten so used to the behaviors of people ghosting.
Correct.
I mean, I put my Wednesday night aside, and then suddenly they ghost the day before, and I think, wow. Rejection is God's protection, right? So thank God. Thank you. Next. But then when I really liked this guy, he was soulful, and I didn't even know. I mean, he gave me this book and he said, read it and then talk to me about it later. And
Just that appeals to your intellect.
yeah.
Yes,
And it had been a gentle experience of courting over about 3 months online, because we were both busy and what have you. And then my friend read this to me because it had really triggered a young place in me, which is a very old story. When I imagine my little self, I think of this sweet girl that used to connect with everybody with hugs and incredible affection, and her family was like this. I remember my grandmother, who was the matriarch of our family, arms by her side, and not demonstrative, and extraordinary in so many other ways, but just not physically affectionate. And it was a really important language for me, and yet was hard to find in my immediate family. Extraordinary mother, scientist, very cerebral, just a fascinating woman who spent her life in service. My dad was this trailblazing outside the box OBGYN who really wanted to, support female causes, and yet for me, I didn't feel like that part of me was being nourished. And she was the one that came out on the date because it was an unmet need that, after all the work we do, it never stops, it always continues. And then there was this sort of little need in me to connect. And he had made it very clear that he was open and willing and interested. But I got triggered because I heard what the young girl heard, right? And it was a very interesting situation. So I, at one point, because we'd agreed to meet and left one of the cars and then carpooled, and then he said, I'll either drive you back to your car or get an Uber, depending on, what it ended up at the end of the day. And it was insane what I heard. He said, usually I get the Uber premium, whatever that is. Usually that's what I would get because it's, it's more comfortable and whatever. And then he didn't finish the sentence. So what I chose to hear from that is, well, usually for myself, I would order the
But
nice
for
car.
you, I
but
wouldn't.
for you, I'm going to downgrade and get you the crappy one. Are
Oh
you okay
my
with
God.
that?
Okay.
I know, mental.
Yes.
And I thought, why is he asking me to choose? Is this a test? Like I have to come forward and say, no, you will order me the nice one. That's not what he was asking of me at all. And when I finally spoke to him about it, I said, I've got an amends to make to you because I was a crazy person. And he said, oh, do tell. And I said, well...
And he's probably going, do
yeah,
tell.
Yeah. No, but I just... and I said, I know it's late, so if you want to talk about it later. And he said, no, let's talk about it now. And I said, well, I have to apologize to you because I had a moment of insecurity and heard what an old part of me is used to hearing.
Right.
That I'm not worthy.
And so how did he
He was like,
respond?
oh my God, it's so crazy it's so interesting what the psyche holds on to.
And did that actually, is that the reason why the date went askew?
Just for me.
For you.
Just for me.
What happened after?
We're still
Okay.
talking.
Okay.
But and communicating and whatever. But I couldn't, it was shocking to me because it hasn't come in that way for me in previous dates. I guess it's because I really like him, and so when it was getting close to thinking that maybe this might be something that would bear different fruit, I was like, I was
you were
too
attached
anxious.
to the outcome.
That's exactly what I was. I was completely attached to the outcome, which brings me to this.
Ta-da!
I printed it up. Oh my God. I can only imagine what that sounded like. This is a beautiful book called Belonging, Remembering Ourselves Home by Toko-Pa Turner. That's what it looks like. Anyone can see it.
Beautiful.
And this was read to me by a friend who intuited that this was what I needed to hear, not knowing what had happened for me. It's called Impatience. Impatience is that irritable guest who shows up before we've established a sense of belonging, when we're shy and awkward and prone to self-doubt. It can stay a good long while. Impatience is our urge to bypass this awkward phase when things aren't yet comfortable or settled and rush to redemption. Paradoxically, it is essential to really inhabit this awkwardness if we want to find our particular way of belonging. It is before familiarity sets in that we are most alive and porous to our environment and our relationships and even ourselves. If you've ever gone traveling with just a backpack, you're familiar with this magic. Traveling where you don't know anyone or how to get about, we're forced into the complete unfamiliarity. Though part of us is impatient to have community and other anchors in place, this clumsy period is full of potential. We could reinvent ourselves or meet different kinds of people outside our habitual type. Now imagine that we could be symbolic travelers every day of our lives by becoming friendly with the awkwardness of all that is unresolved in our hearts. It is a complete reversal of the way we traditionally think about belonging. Rather than striving to be inside knowing, we recognize the privilege of being outside, where our eyes can look freshly upon a thing before familiarity works its soporific influence on us. In these awkward periods, we are also not the same person we're familiar with. Impatience calls us deeper into that awkwardness, perchance to meet ourselves anew. In our bottomless craving to reveal what's unknown, we deprive ourselves of the sensual encounter, the anticipation, and the potential to rejig reality. To be baffled and obstructed is what engages creativity. This is the practice of poets, dreamers, and artists alike. To show up at the frontiers of uncertainty where we are met by 10,000 things. We practice there, on the verge, amateur and unprepared, at being friendly or at least willing towards the discomforts of our confusions. As Rumi says, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment.
Beautiful.
Ay, ay, ay.
Ay, ay, ay. And I mean, it goes back to knowing that growth only happens through uncertainty.
Yeah.
And yet, interestingly enough, our psyches, our habits, our all of us, all of what is composing us wants to grab back quickly, impatiently to whatever is familiar and certain, so that we go back into that space.
And also, we're going to bond based on the bonding patterns that we were taught.
Of course.
You know, so we'll often partner with people who are some kind of reflection of our parents' dynamic, whoever was raising us, because we're going to learn from what's in front of us. So it will get, oh, this is what love is, or this is how people relate to each other. Okay, so then subconsciously we're going to be recreating those patterns until we can sort of identify that.
And step out of it.
Yeah, and
consciously.
Absolutely. And we are, I mean, it's really interesting what Peter Levine talks about. It's scientifically, you know, discussed in terms of trauma and the way that we bond. What differentiates us from other creatures, there's two very important things with regard to trauma. Children, infants, humans, rather than processing the experience within the soma ourselves, because we haven't had that mapped and we don't know how to do that, we immediately will run to a caregiver to have that issue resolved. So we actually choose connection in order to heal trauma rather than allowing it just to pass through our body. But in so doing, because we have an overdeveloped logical brain, we can't behave like animals and just release the vestigial energy from our bodies and shake it off and move on. When you watch animals in the wild, which is what triggered a lot of Peter Levine's research and work, was that animals can live day after day and get up and keep being the prey for the predator and not be traumatized. Oh, I saw him yesterday and that was really crap, so I'm going to do XYZ. It's here I am. I'm going to choose between fight, flight, or freeze, and let's do this. And they have a natural inbuilt relationship with their nervous system that allows them to use that menu of options. But because we allow that energy to get trapped in us and overthink it, we don't allow that process to happen. Of course,
and this is why, you know, some of the work that I do, and I heavily preach, if that's the word, to my clients, is they're primarily women, is to learn to develop a set of tools and a menu, as you just called it, to allow themselves to get the emotion out.
Right.
And so we're too stagnant today in society, right? The way that we work, the way that even we think. I mean, even that is a proof of stagnance, that we just continually go back to certainty and familiarity. I can't say that word.
Familiarity.
Familiarity. And so moving means, you know, it means anything but move. And even meditation is great, but you're not moving. Right. I get the best downloads when I'm actually moving. If I'm dancing to release emotions, this is what I mean. Dancing is amazing. 5 rhythm work is amazing.
Shamanic breathing work is extraordinary.
Shamanic breathing or breath work, or I mean, it's movement will release the emotion trapped within.
Right.
So you can, and that's part of self-responsibility. That's part actually of all the you know, the principles I speak of in terms of self-responsibility. We are responsible for our perceptions, for our growth, for going to someone is the habit.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it's a balance, because I think trauma is very isolating. So once we're traumatized, we sort of go into the shame, like the ashamed animal, and we'll tend to isolate. And it's about finding that beautiful balance between what is the work within and what is the work to connect. And if we continue to try and heal from the same, using what I call the contracts written in crayon by toddlers and teenagers, you know, when we're younger, we create these survival strategies and then we outgrow them. And so suddenly we're sort of adults and realize that little contract that we made, that agreement to be tough and have armor and be the tough tomboy chick, ain't going to cut it anymore. But my beautiful baby boy is leaning into me and wants a feminine touch. It's not going to be suck it up and shut up, I've got a headache. It's got to be something completely different, right? And also, you know, what you described, something that we talk about it, you know, as thinking partners, is there are specific ways that people learn and focus, and you getting some of your best downloads when you move is an indication to me of where your attention is and how you learn. And I'd love to talk to you about that at another time, but it's fascinating how much information now we are getting about the brain and how it works with neuroscience, because we use such a small portion of our brains. But there's never been a verbatim quote. I think people have researched this and they haven't found an exact quote. But Einstein used to talk about this concept that you cannot change a consciousness from the very consciousness that created that consciousness in the first place. So how do we move out of what is current and have a different sort of viewpoint? And for me, the biggest way of opening that up is not to try and solve mind-created problems from the mind. It's going into the body and the heart and cultivating a relationship spiritually. And then from those places, clearing whatever is trapped from the old stories I created in my mind, and then returning to mind with a discipline, with a lot of different disciplines, but a musculature of resiliency, so that the stories I create are now coming from a place of self-love rather
Correct.
than,
Absolutely.
from the old stories.
Why did you choose to share this story with this man upon the first date? It's a very personal story. It speaks of your authenticity, yet I'm interested to hear
Why did I tell him about my reaction?
Why would you want to share that? Most women wouldn't.
Because a life out of integrity is not a life worth living for me. And I think that if the minute, and this is how I started the conversation with him, I said, I'm a person, if I realize that I am even a millimeter out of integrity, I will make amends. And he said, and there we are the same. And I said, and that's why I'd like to honor you with talking about this. I mean, there is such a vastness. Once you start journeying inward, there's so much that can be discussed and mapped and talked about with people. And I cannot possibly fathom dating someone that can't go to those places with me. And even though they may not have access, they may be deep and capable of it, but they just may not have had much
exposure.
I don't have an expectation that they can meet me there immediately, but do they want to come and feed from that plate. So I'm more than happy to offer and show and map how a healthy person processes and owns their pieces. And
so it was also perhaps a way for you to check whether he is aligned with you on that level.
Oh, and
unconsciously.
And do you know what he said? This was the punchline, which was so gorgeous.
Well, I don't know who you are, but you're getting a lot of brownie points right now.
Yes, you are. I know, my friends. I'll tell you.
He will listen to this.
No, I hope. Well, I'll be mortified. Imagine if he doesn't
really?
Oh God.
Eventually, maybe he could.
He's gonna kill me.
Whatever.
Yeah, whatever. No, he won't, because this is what he said. I said, you know what I heard in my
gracious about the whole thing and him. So
I know I'm very private normally, but I just think it was such an interesting. I think the more we share our stories of vulnerability and the places where we stumble, the more universal it is, and then we get to share the tools that get us out of those places.
As it is being said over and over again, when we share our truth. We give permission to others to share theirs.
That's it. I mean,
correct?
That for me,
right.
and that's exactly what I was doing in that exchange, was I'm going to tell you my truth.
Yes.
And let you know what's happening. And his response was, he was like, oh my God, it's amazing what the psyche holds on to. My whole intention the entire night was to honor you. That's it. That's all I wanted to do, was to honor you.
Wow.
And I said to him, look, even if we were to never speak again, I want you to know that you were a trigger for an enormously deep piece of work. I was able to access my primal wound of self-worth. That doesn't happen every day.
No.
And I've done a lot of work on myself.
Thank you to him.
Yes.
Whatever happens, which is not attached to the outcome.
Not being attached to outcome, and just being able to claim that and say, that's exactly what I thought about after. It's like, oh, wow, what happened? I was attached to an outcome. I wanted to sort of connect, and in feeling disconnected because I didn't ground, I missed the ability to just be sort of really calm and centered with him. And
as opposed to reacting.
Yes, completely.
And not being in your truth,
and
really.
And I was self-conscious in a way that I hadn't been before. And
which rattles you, right?
Yes,
I mean,
I didn't feel myself. I didn't know what was going on.
I know. It's interesting how we can do all this work of inner growth, inner power, that very job of choosing life from the inside out, which is a huge commitment, daily commitment, and yet how sometimes we can be rattled in that way with a man. It's kind of a romantic space where it's that. I mean,
it's such a huge. I mean, I think this is my theory at the moment. I have a feeling that we have this vestigial survivalist aspect in our DNA that forces us to choose people to breed with who may not be the nicest people for us, but will give us very strong offspring. Right? So I think there's like a survival gene that would choose the strong male that will have the best bond with us genetically, so that our children will have a better chance. whether that's going to take us to thriving with that person, how close they are to the ability to transform and actually own their work and own their pieces.
That's a totally different story,
right,
and that's not really...
and if they are the hunter, if that's what we've chosen to breed with, if we're going prehistoric with this, or whatever the actual appropriate period is, then we are choosing Paleolithic. That's what it is. Then we are, if a hunter thought as much about kids and cared as much as women do in the familial dynamic, they never would leave the cave to hunt. If they had the worry and the care and the same sort of things, places that we work from, they never would have left the cave to hunt. So I think they're having to awaken this part of themselves, and we have to give them permission to, or they have to give themselves permission to awaken that part. I've spoken to dear friends, men who are in men's groups, and they say that what's amazing and sacred about men's groups, whatever form they take, whether they're out beating drums in the forest or whatever, it's actually what's most powerful for them is that in the absence of females, it forces their own feminine to emerge when they're no longer seeing it externally, right? And so I think as part of this, I mean, man, have I put a lot of thought into, why relationships work or don't work, and without sort of cannibalizing myself about it. But all we can do at the end of the day is actively engage with what's coming in, actively own our pieces and have that integrity, give ourselves permission to not know and not have all the answers, but also to leave no stone unturned. And I think that's one of my favorite things with regard to integrity now, is when I do my due diligence, I know I've done everything I needed to do, and my conscience is really clear. This week, case in point, someone was highly, viciously reactive with me. They were so out of alignment with what was really happening that it actually made it, I used to be conflict avoidant, and now that I work with these conflict resolution specialists, it's been absolutely revelatory for me. It's hugely transformative to understand why sometimes we're incapable of resolving conflict, and a lot of it is empathy based, or a lack thereof. And so I was really able to go into compassion, and my friend gave me a very quick paradigm shift, because I went into sort of the old story just for a second of I'm the bad thing, which is the language of shame, right? I'm the bad thing. But then when I really thought about it, my friend said, hang on a minute, is she nuts? If she was really focused on the right issue, it would be this. And it opened up everything for me, this complete paradigm shift. And so I just wrote back very, very compassionately. And I said, I can feel your hurt. I can feel it. And so I wish you love. And I gave them sort of the facts, and I said, there were so many errors. There were so many things that were out of alignment with just basic facts of the situation, that I knew that it was, they were reacting from a place of enormous pain. Currently not lacking, currently doesn't have the tools to move through it and respond to me in a way
that would be self-responsible as well.
Exactly.
And lead themselves through it.
Yeah, exactly. And then the husband leaned in and wanted to communicate and defend her for her behaviours. And I was like, and then very nicely, sort of chauvinistically put a cap at the end and said, we're too busy to communicate any further, so this is the end of the communication.
That's also very, some of the shadows of the masculine, they cut off. It's cutting off. It's done out the window. Yeah. It's protective as well, right? Yeah. I mean, more light and love to him too.
Absolutely.
And for protecting his women.
And what are the things that the masculine in doing and the feminine in just being able to be with something? I think they both felt very uncomfortable sitting in that discomfort. And that's what I sort of work with my children all the time, with is can you have the feeling you're having and have it in a way that stay with it, and also in a way that's safe for other people to be around. So here are some options. Yes. You can go and bash a pillow, you can go and scream into it, you can do this, and this, but you're not allowed to harm me. You're not allowed to harm your brother, but have that feeling. And then if you need tools from me, I'll help you move through it. But it's for me, and this is a really lovely point that I love returning to, is that, and having a highly relational form of intelligence, for me, it's about how I'm in relationship with things. And something that my mentors, Donna Markova and Angie MacArthur, talk about is, rather than talking about relationship, what about playing with the idea of how you're relating, so it stops being a noun and becomes a verb, right? And then also
Relating.
yes, exactly.
It's big.
Yeah, huge. And
Huge.
my English teacher, when I was really young, to teach us what a preposition was, would say, imagine prepositions are like imagine a box of Kleenex. And your relationship to the box of Kleenex is a preposition. You're either by it, on it, under it, over it, through it, beside it, right? Some of those might not be prepositions, but most of them are. And that's how I like to go back to that when I'm working through something, when I'm puzzled by something. I mean, my two favorite questions are, what would love do and how can I make this sacred? I love those questions. And then in the meantime, how am I relating to this thing? Am I with it? Am I under it?
Right.
And what relationship do I want to have with it?
And it's speaking of the power of creating and the power and the actual power we have,
Right.
that we mostly, until we do this work and we commit to this, we don't realize we don't realize the power that we have in the creation process. Through conversations, relationships. This is why I love and work with ontology. It's the power of being and the power of relating, and how do we create these moments? How do we create perceptions? How do we create more power? We are constantly in the state of creation.
And also, how do we want to feel about it?
Of course.
Because if we're creating, there's a book, I can't remember the author's name.
Well, that has to do with our integrity and our authenticity, is being aware of what we want to create. Then we can align even more with that and be in integrity for ourselves.
That's right. Yeah, but also, rather than I want to have a Lamborghini because I think that's going to make me happy, why don't I just start with being happy, and then maybe everything else, including the Lamborghini, is irrelevant.
Or maybe the Lamborghini is actually part of it. Who knows? Who
knows? But let's start with how we want to feel in general,
exactly,
rather than going after the external thing that might or might not give us the
external will
feeling.
never solve anything, unless the intention for getting that tool, that external validation is meaningful and aligned with the values that we live by. Yeah. So we have a couple of minutes left, and I want to know from you quickly, what is your vision of your life in a year?
Oh, wow. Oh, I'm going to be
quick
deliciously partnered with a fabulous man whom my children adore, and I'm going to be thriving in all of my different practices in ways that I can combine them all. My book, at least my first book, will be more than complete, and I'm going to be performing juicy, meaningful roles that offer something fabulous to the consciousness.
Woohoo! That's an awesome answer. I love it. What can you not go without on a daily basis?
Laughter, connection, friendship, love, a bath, and some chocolate.
That's amazing. What delight. Thank you so much for sharing this moment.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
And creating this show, this podcast, whatever we want to call it, more juicy, more authentic, more powerful through your embodiment and your being. So thank you for being here. I love you.
I love you. What an amazing opportunity.
Thank you. Fun. Thank you for this again.